In the dimly lit room of a small apartment in a Chicago suburb, Linda sat at an old wooden table. Her face, illuminated by the soft glow of a desk lamp, expressed a mix of fatigue and despair. At 29, life had left her little room for joy. With curls of chestnut hair gathered in a careless bun and a gaunt face, she looked older than her age. Her hands, accustomed to long hours in the medical field, were now sifting through a stack of newspapers with job advertisements. Her gaze lingered on each line, but nothing suitable caught her eye. Medical positions had become a luxury, and the crisis had taken away the stability she once had. Her last job as a nurse ended months ago due to layoffs, and since then, Linda had been scraping by with odd jobs, simple decorations and a few old photographs hung on the wall above the table. They were her only connection to the past, small fragments of a better life she could no longer afford to dream about. In recent days, Linda felt particularly unwell. Dizziness and weakness accompanied her every morning, yet she couldn't afford a doctor's visit. She just tried to drink more water and not think of the worst. "I just need more rest," she repeated to herself, though inside she knew her condition was worsening. Suddenly, the phone rang. Linda frowned, but, assuming it might be related to work, decided to answer. "Hello?" Her voice was slightly hoarse. "Good evening," came a confident man's voice from the other end. "My name is Simon. You were recommended to me as an excellent specialist. My employer has an urgent need for a caregiver. It's temporary work, but well paid." Linda was at a loss for words. Recommended? She didn't know anyone who could recommend her after her dismissal. "Excuse me, are you sure it's me?" she cautiously clarified. "Absolutely, Miss Linda. If you agree, I can explain the details. You'll be working in the home of an elderly gentleman. All that's required is basic care. We will provide you with everything necessary. Of course, the pay will pleasantly surprise you." These words sparked a faint glimmer of hope in Linda. A high salary could not only help her cover debts, but also allow for a medical examination she hadn't dared to undergo for a long time. Yet something in Simon's voice made her wary. It sounded too courteous, almost like a person hiding something important. "I'm ready to hear the proposal," she replied, trying not to reveal her desperation. "Excellent." The voice on the other end softened slightly. "I'll send you the address. My employer would like to meet with you tomorrow. Please come at 9 a.m. Linda nodded, though Simon couldn't see it, and mumbled, "All right. I'll come. Thank you." When the call ended, she sat in silence for a while, holding the phone in her hands. She had a strange premonition that this call would mark the beginning of something new, but not necessarily good. Nonetheless, she had little choice. Early in the morning, Linda stood before the majestic gates of the mansion. The wrought-iron pattern seemed to look down on her, emphasizing her sense of insignificance. The sky was overcast with grey clouds, perfectly complementing her gloomy mood. She adjusted the old leather bag on her shoulder, instinctively trying to smooth the fabric of her coat, which had long lost its former novelty. Taking a deep breath, Linda replayed yesterday's call in her mind. The offer still seemed strange, almost unreal, but she couldn't refuse such an opportunity. Her small savings were already running out. "Maybe this is exactly what I need," she thought, trying to suppress her anxiety. The gates opened with a soft creak, as if someone had been watching her and waiting for her arrival. Linda stepped forward, entering the grounds. Manicured flower beds and perfectly trimmed bushes lined the paved path on either side. The spacious courtyard looked like pictures from magazines she had once seen in expensive waiting rooms. Every corner of this place spoke of wealth and perfection. The mansion in the center resembled a castle from another era. Massive windows with thin curtains, columns leading to a grand entrance, marble staircases that seemed to have thousands of stories to tell. This house commanded respect, yet simultaneously frightened with its cold magnificence. On the porch, a woman was waiting for her, Victoria Sullivan, tall, slim, with impeccably sharp features. Her black hair was styled in a coiffure that did not allow a single strand to fall out of place. Her face was perfectly accentuated by light makeup and a stern look that immediately made Linda feel uneasy. Her grey suit fit flawlessly, highlighting her elegance and authority. "Miss Linda!" Victoria pronounced her name as if she had already made up her mind about her. Her gaze quickly scanned Linda, pausing at her modest clothing and tired expression. "Yes, that's me," Linda replied quietly, trying to infuse confidence in her voice, though the trembling in her knees betrayed her inattention. "Follow me," Victoria said curtly, turning towards the door. Her movements were practiced, as if she had no time for unnecessary words. Linda hurried after her, trying not to pay attention to the few faces glimpsing through the mansion's windows. It seemed the staff was also watching her, assessing her from the first moments. Inside, the house was even more luxurious, dark wood floors reflecting the soft light of chandeliers hanging from high ceilings. Rooms with tall doors lined both sides of the long corridor. The walls were adorned with paintings in golden frames, including both portraits and landscapes. Linda felt small amidst this majestic setting. Victoria stopped at one of the doors and turned to Linda. There was a barely noticeable shadow of doubt on the mistress of the house's face before she spoke. "My husband, James Sullivan, is in a very grave condition." She folded her arms across her chest. Her voice was dry but confident. "He needs constant care. Do you have the relevant experience?" "Yes, I worked in a clinic, caring for elderly patients," Linda replied, striving to maintain eye contact despite the weight of Victoria's gaze. "I hope that will be sufficient." Victoria frowned slightly. Her eyes once again skimmed Linda's attire. "However, be warned, I value discipline and order. If you decide to stay, I will expect full commitment from you." Linda nodded again, feeling her appearance clearly did not inspire Victoria's trust. But she did not allow herself to feel embarrassed. She knew she could prove her worth if given the chance. "James suffers from a rare genetic disease affecting the respiratory system and nerve endings," Victoria continued, now a bit quieter. "Doctors claim he has only a few months to live, but I believe the right care can prolong his life." Victoria opened the door, and Linda saw James for the first time. The large room was filled with medical equipment, humming quietly, creating a strange sense of sterility. A frail-looking elderly man lay on the wide bed. His face was pale and exhausted, but there was something deep and piercing in his green eyes, as if he was trying to understand who she was. "Welcome, miss," he whispered. His voice was weak, yet it retained warmth. A slight smile softened Linda's expression. It seemed to her the tension eased somewhat, as if he approved of her presence. Linda momentarily forgot her insecurity, understanding that this man needed her help. Here awaited her not only a job, but possibly something much more that she couldn't yet comprehend. With the first days of working in the Sullivan mansion, Linda's life began to change. Every day, she spent within the massive walls of the new home, absorbing the habits and routine of the place. The first thing that surprised her was James himself. Despite Victoria's words about his dire condition, he appeared more active than anticipated. Of course, the illness had weakened his body, but his mind remained keen and lively. Sometimes he even got out of bed, albeit with great difficulty, to walk around the room, and once Linda even caught him reading an old book. "Come closer," he called one day as she checked the monitor readings. His voice was weak, but had an energy that caught her attention. "Yes, Mr. Sullivan," she approached, looking at him attentively. "Enough with the formalities, just call me James," he said with a slight smile. "Otherwise, I feel older than I am." Linda smiled. It was the first time he had shown such informal regard. His amiability became a pleasant surprise to her. Sometimes he even joked, making her feel more comfortable. Once, he even told a joke that made her genuinely laugh, a rarity in recent times. "James, it seems like you're using tricks to make me relax," she teased once, to which he simply chuckled. "Tricks are all I have left, Linda," he said with a grin. But there was a hint of sadness in his voice. However, not everything in the house appeared so easy. Victoria often appeared unexpectedly, her stony gaze sliding over Linda, evaluating her every move. Sometimes she asked odd questions about James's condition, as if withholding something. Her presence always left a tense atmosphere in its wake. One day at breakfast, Linda overheard Victoria speaking on the phone. Her voice was quiet, but Linda discerned the words, "We don't have time. We need to accelerate the process." These phrases stuck in her mind, leaving a vague feeling of unease. Moreover, Linda noticed a man occasionally appeared in the house, whom she recognized as the family lawyer. His presence was infrequent, but each visit was accompanied by tense conversations behind closed doors. Once or twice, she heard raised voices but couldn't make out the words. One day, the lawyer stayed longer than usual, and upon leaving the office he cast Linda a look that seemed scrutinizing. "You're new here?" he suddenly asked, stopping in the doorway. "Yes, sir. I'm taking care of James," Linda replied, feeling slight tension in his presence. "Very well," he muttered before leaving the house, leaving behind a strange sensation. One day, while cleaning James's office, she discovered some unusual documents. In the corner of the table lay a folder with papers, among which she glimpsed something resembling a will. Her gaze lingered on lines mentioning Victoria's name. The document spoke of significant assets seemingly intended to transfer to her. Feeling her heart race, Linda quickly closed the folder. "This is none of my business," she reminded herself, yet the feeling of unease did not leave her. At another time, Linda noticed a small box of photographs on a shelf in the office. Among them she saw pictures of a young couple. Victoria and James looked happy, but in the background was another person whose face seemed vaguely familiar to her. She wanted to learn more, but didn't dare ask questions. The first days in the Sullivan household turned out to be more complex than she had anticipated. Something about this place and these people seemed mysterious, as if secrets were concealed beneath the surface, which she couldn't yet uncover. Each day her sense of caution grew, but she didn't know whether she should seek answers or remain on the sidelines. One night, after finishing her duties, Linda heard a soft voice from James's bedroom. "Linda, please come in." She entered, startled that he called her at such a late hour. The room was bathed in the soft light of a lamp, creating a cozy but somewhat tense atmosphere. James's face appeared tired, but in his eyes there was something unusual, concern mixed with hope. On the bedside table stood a glass of water, which he seemed not to have touched. A strange tension hung in the air. "What happened?" "Are you unwell?" she asked, approaching, ready to check his condition. "No, it's not that," he smiled slightly, trying to reassure her. "I have a request. I've thought about it for a long time, but now I'm sure I must ask you." "Of course, if I can help," Linda replied, feeling the tension rising. Her voice was slightly louder than intended, but James didn't seem to mind. "I want you to pretend to be my daughter," he said quietly yet firmly. His simple words hit her like a bolt from the blue. Stunned, Linda tried to comprehend what she had heard. She didn't know what to say, and silence hung in the room, broken only by the soft hum of the medical equipment. James did not take his eyes off her face, waiting for her reaction. "I understand this is strange," he continued, seeing her confusion, "but I want to spend my last days in the illusion that my family is near. Victoria can't give me that. She's too preoccupied with her plans. And you remind me of her." His voice faltered, and he turned away, as if afraid she might see tears in his eyes. Linda felt her heart tighten. This man, whom she barely knew, was entrusting her with his most intimate pain. He must have harbored this for a long time before daring to open up to her about his feelings. "Are you sure?" "Why me?" she quietly asked, sitting on a chair beside his bed. "You resemble her, my daughter," he replied, looking into the distance. "That same gentle gaze, that same kindness, and I want to believe she would have forgiven me for the mistakes I've made." Linda understood she couldn't refuse him. There was something in his words that made her feel even more compassion towards him. "All right," she finally said. "I'll do it for you." James smiled. His face relaxed slightly. He seemed genuinely grateful, as if her agreement gave him new hope. From that moment, their communication deepened. Linda began to see in James not just a sick man, but a person with a rich soul, full of memories and regrets. They spent long hours talking about the past, his dreams, and missed opportunities. James spoke about his youth, about once losing what he cherished most. His words were filled with sincerity that touched Linda to the core. Sometimes he talked about his daughter as though she was there in the room. Linda realized it wasn't just a game for him, but a chance to feel warmth he had been deprived of for many years. "Thank you for listening to me," he said one day, reaching out his hand to her. "It means more to me than you can imagine." But one day, everything changed. While cleaning the office, Linda accidentally knocked over a stack of documents. The papers scattered on the floor, and as she picked them up, she noticed something strange. Among the reports on James's health, there were mentions of a substance that could worsen his condition. Linda frowned. She glanced at the signatures and noticed Victoria's name. "What is this?" she whispered, feeling her heart begin to race. The documents indicated that James's treatment was being adjusted, but not for the better. The reports mentioned that he was taking medications which could weaken his body. Linda recalled Victoria's words about not having time, and now those words took on a new, grim meaning. That same night, Linda decided to check the medicine cabinet where the medications were stored. She compared the names of the drugs in the reports with those in the cabinet and discovered vials of a substance not listed in the doctor's prescriptions. It was confirmation of her worst suspicions. She returned to her room, feeling fear and anger boiling inside her. Victoria was not only playing the role of a caring wife, but seemed to be deliberately worsening James's condition. Linda couldn't sleep for a long time, trying to figure out what to do next. One thing she knew for sure: the truth couldn't remain hidden. The tension in the Sullivan mansion grew with each passing day. Victoria began to notice how James was getting closer to Linda. He started spending long hours with her, sharing stories from his life and memories that apparently no one had listened to in a long time. Linda not only listened but also asked questions, sincerely interested in his past. This infuriated Victoria. "You seem too engrossed in your duties," Victoria once said, approaching Linda in the hallway. Linda looked up, trying not to reveal her anxiety. "I'm sorry, Mum, but I'm just doing my job," she replied, trying to speak in an even tone. "The job doesn't imply constant conversations." Victoria crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze cold. "I remind you, you are here to care for James, not to entertain him." Linda felt indignation growing in her chest, but restrained herself. She understood that Victoria was trying to undermine her confidence, but her intention to stay with James was stronger. Victoria started taking small steps to push Linda out of the house. She nitpicked over trifles, medicines being administered too late or the room being insufficiently cleaned. Each time Linda justified herself, but felt as if Victoria was deliberately creating unfavorable conditions for her. One day, while tidying up an old room in the mansion, Linda came across a trunk filled with letters. She carefully opened it and began examining the contents. Among the yellowed pages, she found several letters addressed to a woman named Isabel. The style and signature belonged to James. The letters spoke of love and regret, and the last lines mentioned the birth of a child. Linda froze. Her heart stopped, and countless thoughts swirled in her head. Her attention was drawn to a photograph lying beneath the letters. It depicted a young woman with kind eyes and a mass of dark hair holding an infant. Next to them was a young James, smiling, but there was noticeable sadness in his eyes. Their poses and expressions spoke of closeness, leaving no doubt this was his family. This discovery shook Linda. She carefully tucked the letter and photograph into her pocket, not knowing what to do with them. Her thoughts were filled with questions. Who was this child? What happened to him and the woman? Linda couldn't shake the feeling that James's story was far more complex than he let on. Something within her responded, strengthening her desire to uncover the truth. That evening, Victoria gathered the lawyer and several witnesses in the house. Linda overheard the conversations from James's room. "We can't delay any longer," Victoria said, her voice full of determination. "The will needs to be signed while James is still able to do so." Linda, standing by the door, felt anger boiling within her. She understood that Victoria was trying to speed up the process to deprive James of the opportunity to reveal the truth. It couldn't be a coincidence. Her attempts to control the situation became apparent. Linda knew she had to intervene. Linda resolutely entered. Victoria turned to her with a look of blatant irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked coldly. "I want to talk to James," Linda replied. "That's impossible. We have important matters. You can leave." "No," Linda stepped forward. "This concerns his health. I can't leave until I say what I must." James, lying on the bed, raised his eyes to Linda. His gaze was full of fatigue, but he gestured to her that he was ready to listen. "I found something in this house. Something that changes everything." Her voice trembled, but she knew she must go on. Victoria looked at her with clear displeasure but didn't interrupt. Linda understood this was her only chance to convey the truth before Victoria took full control. Suddenly, James's condition rapidly deteriorated. Linda was monitoring his equipment and noticed the indicators on the monitor began blinking alarmingly. His breathing became irregular and his skin turned pale. Linda instantly began to act. Victoria stepped in front of her, blocking the path to James, with an icy expression on her face. "Everything is going as it should," she said calmly, as if she wasn't troubled by the unfolding situation. "Are you serious?" Linda exclaimed, unable to hide her anger. "He's dying. We must do something now." "Don't meddle in matters that don't concern you," Victoria retorted, arms crossed over her chest. "You have done your job. Now leave it to me." Linda couldn't hold back her emotions. She understood that Victoria intentionally refrained from taking action. Her suspicions of Victoria's involvement in worsening James's condition now seemed indisputable. "You're poisoning him," Linda said, looking Victoria straight in the eye. "I'm aware of the substances you've been adding to his medication." "You have no proof," Victoria replied with a cold smile. "Even if you did, who would believe you? You're nobody here." Ignoring the threats, Linda rushed to James's bed. She began checking the equipment and preparing an emergency adrenaline shot, which she had found in the medical cabinet earlier. Victoria tried to stop her, grabbing her arm, but Linda pulled away. "If you don't step aside," Linda said firmly, "I'll call the police right now. Believe me, I have enough evidence to see you arrested." Victoria retreated, her face darkening with rage, but she no longer attempted to intervene. Trembling, Linda administered the injection and started performing first aid on James. It was a fight for his life, and she couldn't let him go. Minutes felt like an eternity, but eventually James began to regain consciousness. His eyes slowly opened, and he attempted to speak, though his voice was barely audible. "Linda," he whispered, his gaze focused on her. "Thank you." "Don't say anything," Linda softly said, squeezing his hand. "You need to rest." But James shook his head. His face expressed determination despite his weakness. "Everyone needs to know the truth," he said, gathering his last strength. "Victoria, she tried to kill me. She's capable of anything to get the money." The witnesses and the lawyer present in the room, whom Victoria had called earlier, froze. Victoria paled, but her face remained stony. "That's a lie," she hissed. "He's just delirious." "No," James continued, his voice growing louder. "Linda, my daughter, she's the only one I can trust." A silence hung over the room. Linda couldn't believe her ears. She felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but was at a loss for words. "All the documents are in the office," James added before his strength left him again, and he lay back on the pillow. Victoria rushed to the door, but the lawyer stopped her. "I think we need to check these documents," he said coolly, his look no longer friendly. In the following hours, the truth came to light. Documents found in the office confirmed James's words. The will had been altered to include Linda as his sole heir, and there was evidence that Victoria had been using toxic substances to gradually weaken her husband. The police arrived at the mansion at dawn. Victoria was arrested, while Linda remained by James's side, holding his hand. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered when he opened his eyes again. "I wanted to make sure you'd be safe," he replied. "Now I know you're strong. You'll manage." Linda nodded, feeling determination fill her heart. Her life changed forever, but she knew she now had a chance to start anew. The next morning, the silence was oppressive. Linda entered James's room and immediately sensed something was wrong. His face looked peaceful. Her heart sank as she tried to wake him. "Please, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. But he did not respond. His breathing had ceased, and his body was cold. Linda clutched his hand, desperately trying to hold on to that moment in reality. The doctors arrived too late. James passed quietly in his sleep, leaving behind an endless void. His last words to Linda echoed in her mind again and again, like a testament. "We missed a lot, but you can change the future." These words became her anchor in the dark hours of mourning. During the funeral, Linda stood by James's grave with a photograph in her hands, an old photograph she found in the trunk, where he appeared young and full of life. Those who came to say goodbye spoke warm words, recalling his accomplishments. But this was the father she found too late. As the priest finished his speech, Linda stepped towards the grave. Her hand shook as she placed flowers on the coffin and, bowing her head, whispered, "Thank you for everything, Dad. I promise I will do everything to make you proud of me." After his passing, Linda took on the responsibility of realizing their shared dream. With the funds he left her, she began establishing shelters. These places became not just a symbol of James's memory, but also the embodiment of her personal mission. Linda helped those in need, remembering how hard it had been for her in the past. However, her path was not easy. Every decision was accompanied by memories of James. In the evenings, she often sat in the mansion's garden, where they had many conversations. There, under the starry sky, she drew strength from his words, which remained forever in her heart. Linda sat alone, watching the sunset. Her gaze was full of determination, and in her hands she held that same photograph of James. "You were right, Dad," she said aloud, as if he could hear her. "Truth and love always prevail. I will try not to let you down." Tears streamed down her cheeks, but they were tears of gratitude. A gentle breeze caressed her face, as if it were one last farewell gesture from James. Linda's and her father's story concluded on a poignant note, proving that even after loss, one can find light, truth, love, and memory. These were now her strength and legacy, which she would cherish always. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to not miss new releases. See you soon.